this is going to be a film that uses the story of this artist almost as a Trojan horse to tell a story about loss and how to cope with loss and how you can turn loss into something beautiful if you're lucky.
Aloha, welcome to another episode of Love What with Audrey Weilai, where I ask my friends and mentors what non-romantic love means to them. And today I have a wonderful friend of mine, Jörg Fockele, who's a multiple Emmy Award winner for writing, directing, and producing. Hi, Jörg.
Hey, Audrey, how are you?
So excited to have you. Could you tell us more about yourself?
Let's see. So I was born and raised in Germany. I moved to New York City 1995, 96. It was like a slow process. At the time, I was still in film school in Munich in Germany. So technically I was a film student, but I was allowed to make my films in New York. I completely fell in love with New York City very unexpectedly because the United States, to be perfectly honest, was not on my wish list of countries. I think if I had had a choice at the time, I would have stayed in Europe, but I had a chance to go to New York for free, all expenses paid, and make a film. And then, like I said, I completely fell in love with the city. I fell into television production in New York, and at some point in 2008, moved to San Francisco. At that point, television production where I worked was all over the country anyways, so I had to travel. And it didn't matter where I lived. And at that point, I was kind of done with New York. I had lived in New York for 12 years. And, the same reasons that excited me about New York, the fact that the city never sleeps, that it's always going, 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 kind of started to get on my nerves and I wanted a slower pace. So I picked San Francisco and I've been in San Francisco since 2008. So it's been almost 18 years at this point.
And what do you love the most about San Francisco?
I love, coming from northern Germany, where winters are not necessarily super cold, and we didn't always have snow, but winters are gray. You don't see
Mm,
the sun sometimes for days or weeks at a time. It is overcast, it drizzles a lot, it rains a lot, and a lot of people have kind of seasonal, what is that, seasonal something disorder,
yeah.
from the bad weather. In California, even here in Northern California, most of the time we have blue skies, even when it gets chillier in the winter. And chilly for us is like 50 degrees is for us. You can relate to that. You're in Hawaii.
I know when it falls below 70s here,
Yeah.
people freak out.
I gotta put a scarf on. So I've become a little a little wimpy here. But that's one of the reasons that I still love this city is, right now it is November, late November, and it's blue sky. It's not warm outside, but it's blue sky. The light for me is a big reason. It reminds me of Southern Europe. Sometimes it feels like Italy here. And I do love the combination in San Francisco between nature being so close, regardless of whether you want ocean. The Pacific Ocean is a 20-minute bike ride from my house. If I want to go into the mountains in the summer or in the winter for skiing, I have Lake Tahoe not too far from here. You can go up north, you can go up south. Yosemite is not far. So I'm in nature in a very short period of time. I'm literally 2 blocks away from Golden Gate Park. We have a dog, so we're almost in the park daily. And that's become more and more important to me as I get older. And at the same time, San Francisco does have a very healthy cultural life in terms of, the documentary film scene here is pretty strong. You might even say stronger than in New York. There's not a lot of like narrative film here, but documentaries, a lot going on. You have a lot of dance here. So there's enough art, museums, etc., that it feels like it's plentiful for me. I don't need any more than that. I don't need a city of the size of New York City anymore.
And do you primarily work on documentaries like Sally and Surviving Voices?
I said earlier that I fell into television in New York, and that
Okay.
is true. I worked in television from the year roughly about 99, I want to say, until 2016. Obviously, there's an overlap with San Francisco. So after I moved to San Francisco from 2008 to 2016, I was still doing television from here. And at that point, I had always done my own documentary work on the side. That was always more like a hobby because for most of us with a documentary film background, it is impossible to support ourselves financially. It's just not feasible
Okay.
because there's just not enough money there. So despite of the fact that I have a degree, which is useless in documentary filmmaking, but I learned how to do documentary filmmaking from scratch. It's not really something that very few of us can make a living with that. And most people I know who are very successful at it are people who are independently wealthy. But if you don't have the finances to back up what you're doing, if you don't have the finances to at least support your rent and your food, then it's very hard to make documentary films. So hence television work for a long time. And in 2018, I switched because I was kind of getting tired of television. I started my own small production company here in San Francisco that works primarily with nonprofit organizations. I produce fundraising videos, online content, and videos for nonprofits. I work with the YMCA of the East Bay. I work with the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, the National AIDS Memorial. I just recently worked with a company with LA Voice out of LA. I work with the Asian Pacific Islander Council here in San Francisco, etc. And I produce those kinds of videos that um, more so than the work I did in television really also feels good for the heart. And it is kind of in a way a hybrid between I still make money, I can charge for those, but I do get to do something that is close enough to my documentary roots. I'm not doing like a lifestyle television show, which I've done, which, made me miserable because it was
Oh.
so stupid.
Okay. And you mentioned these type of projects you do feels good for the heart. How does that tie into non-romantic love?
Ooh, you're bringing out the big guns right away, aren't you? Well, we haven't really talked about non-romantic love and like a definition of that, right? So, not having said that and not knowing what your understanding of non-romantic love is, I can say that I have a profound love for what I do. The act of creating video and film content is something about that just it feeds my soul, it fills my heart, it makes me happy, and I am very much aware of the fact that it's a very privileged position to be in, that I'm getting paid for something that I really care about deeply, and that's just talking about the process. Add to that that now, since I started my company in 2018, that I've been able to work with organizations or companies that do good, that are out there to help people, and that I work with individuals who work for those organizations that almost across the board I found are amazing individuals. There is certainly a love I feel for these organizations and for the people I work with. I was just thinking about that. I've been doing videos for an organization here in San Francisco called Open House that caters to LGBTQ elders. And the person who runs the PR and the work that ties into my video production is someone I absolutely love. We just hit it off from the get-go. We have so much fun together. And I like to think because of that, because of the fact that we get along so well, we produce videos that really express that. I think our videos show that we really love each other and love working with each other.
How has the LGBTQ community changed since you work with people in that community?
Ooh, that's another big question. Let me think. You mean like specifically like over the last across like 10 years or so since I started working in like with nonprofits, or
Yes, yes, it has grown from what I can see, and it seems like a very supportive community.
well, again, I think in San Francisco here, we have to be aware. I don't like to call it a bubble. I sometimes feel like, we are the more progressive people or the people that don't want to hate other people, that don't talk about diversion, but try to bring people together, that we're actually the majority. We just have very large bubbles in other parts of this country where people are very negative and are all about finding like an enemy they can all pounce on. But we do live in a climate here that is very LGBTQ friendly and where you can be yourself without having to fear for your life. So that is certainly something that has been here since I came here and is probably was one of the reasons that I came to San Francisco, and that is still here. Having said that, people really are on the fence. I see a lot of people here who have serious mental issues and are really, really, really worried about their own livelihood, their own lives, despite of the fact that here in California, we are to some degree shielded from the worst, at
Yeah.
least to some point. I have friends of mine who literally were not just talking about moving away, but they actually packed up their stuff and moved to Portugal. They've been gone for 5 years or so. So there is certainly a feeling of unease here in the community, a feeling of uncertainty about what's going to happen next, until the Supreme Court just recently rejected that to reopen the case about equal marriage rights. There was certainly nervousness about that. Are they going to just annul our marriages and take us back 15 years? 20 years. We know that hasn't happened yet, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen in the future. And then that's one of those examples where I feel like, despite of the fact that here in California, we are to some degree shielded from the worst that comes out of Washington, D.C., we will still be affected by it. And I think more so than we ever anticipated. So there's a fear in the community. There's an unease in the community for sure. But there's also a sense of that this is bringing us together. I think there is a sense of we have to all be on high alert and we all have to be willing to do something together.
Does that make you feel even more passionate about the work you do? And how is that reflected?
It does make me feel more passionate about the work that I do. It also shows me that the work that I do really is important, because I do tend to make films and videos about the people that are being attacked right now. So yeah, I think overall it makes me feel really good about what I'm doing. And at the same time, I see my funding both from my own personal projects, the projects that I don't get paid for, and the funding for my paid online videos that I produce for nonprofits. I see the budgets on both ends dwindling. The anti-DEI stance of the current government has trickled down to us in California in a way that I never anticipated. For example, we have an organization here in California called California Humanities. They support all kinds of projects, including film projects, and they had to rescind some of their grants. Thank God that was after I submitted one of my projects there. But a friend of mine who made a podcast about a church here that was very active in the gay community in the 1980s when people were dying of AIDS left and right. She made it. She received a grant from that organization, and they had to take 50% of it back because
50%.
50%, 50.
Wow.
And they were already in the middle of spending the money. And the reason that they had to rescind the grant is because what I didn't know is that they received their money from the NEA and the National Endowment of the Arts. So the National Endowments of the Arts cut their funding, cut the funding to this grant organization, and in return, they had to cut the grants that they give out to people like myself and my friends. So, there are direct implications of what's happening in Washington, D.C. that we feel in our artistic work. And at the same time, the nonprofit organizations I work with, many of them depend on grants and support from the government. And if, because of the fact that they are working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, if their funds get cut, even just by a percentage, it means they have to cut certain things that they offer. And many of them, before they cut their services, they will cut anything that falls under public relations or press or, like outreach, blah, blah, blah. So videos are not cheap, let's face it. You can write something up, you can take photos for very little money. If you want a professionally produced video that is shot by professionals and edited by professionals, it's not a cheap thing.
So what are you going to do? It's okay if you don't want to share.
No, but I am happy to share because to some degree, I don't know. You're catching me exactly at that moment where I am realizing that my income has been severely affected by this year. I know that at least one or two of the organizations that I've worked with for years and that seem to be very happy with what I do, either they don't produce videos this year, or they even cut their fundraising events because, if you do a big event at the Hilton Hotel here in their ballroom with like catered food and everything, it costs a lot of money. They have to front a lot of money. So they decide we're just not going to do that. The money that we spend on that we can spend it in a smarter way by, I don't know, sending out an email campaign. I'm making it up. I'm not a CEO of that kind of company, so I don't know. But I've seen that with multiple nonprofits at this point that I work with, that they're either just simply not coming back to me, when I know, hey, the cycle would start now and I don't hear from them, or one of them even called me and said, I'm really sorry, I need to tell you this, but we have to cut our budgets. We're not going to come back to you. And he just wanted to let me know that it had nothing to do with the work that we had done. He wanted to let me know that this was actually purely about funding and finances. So you're catching me at a point where I really have to figure out what to do. And in terms of my own film projects, um, the one that I'm working on right now, that I'm in the middle of editing, and we have 2 more days of shooting to do. It's about the artist Mel Odom in New York City. We said from the get-go, we're not going to go after grants because in this climate, a film about a gay man who was working on homoerotic art in New York City in the 1980s and who was profoundly affected by AIDS. That is not something that was easily fundable at this point. So we decided from the get-go, let's do this through other funds, and Kickstarter is one of those things that we did.
How did you get involved with that project?
I came prepared.
Okay.
This is the art from Mel Odom,
Yeah.
the artist that we're making the film about. This is a little card that we created. When I meet people at this point, I bring my little card and it has a little code in the background, the QR code. You
Yes.
can go to our page. We have a fiscal sponsor and my email address is on there. A friend of mine is an old friend of this artist, of Mel Odom. They've known each other for over 30 years. They met in New York in the 90s or early 90s. And he's a graphic artist, my friend is. And he said at some point, as we're sitting actually over dinner, he was like, oh, I have this, I've always wanted to make this film about my friend Mel Odom. And at that point, I had just finished the other film that you already referenced earlier, Sally, about Sally Gearhart. This is our little poster and postcard. I had just finished that film. I was sort of kind of looking for something new. And so I was like, who is this guy? And then he showed me his art, Mel Odom's art. And although I had never heard of Mel, I instantly recognized the art because it was in New York City. It was on Time Out magazine. He created some book sleeves for some authors. And so I recognized the art without knowing anything about him. And then I found out that he was profoundly driven in the 80s and early 90s by the losses he experienced around HIV and AIDS. And that's where the story started to get really interesting to me because I wasn't really interested in doing an artist biography so much as this is going to be a film that uses the story of this artist almost as a Trojan horse to tell a story about loss and how to cope with loss and how you can turn loss into something beautiful if you're lucky. Obviously that's not always the case, but in this case, Mel Odom was able to use the losses of his friends to inspire his art and to channel this feeling of being completely powerless the face of this epidemic that was ravaging the city and the gay community. He used the one thing he had control over, which was his art.
He's still living, right? That
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
like
yeah.
a ignorant question.
No, most people don't know about him, and he
Okay.
stopped drawing like a long time ago, so it's not ignorant at all. He is 75 years old, living in New York City, and he is a wonderful man. That's the thing that I realized after we met with him, that he is a really, really cool guy, very humble, very sweet man. Another reason that I really wanted to make this film, because, when I worked in television, I had to do projects about people that I had absolutely zero respect for, that were just really nasty to work with, but it's part of the job. And in this case, the good thing about doing stuff for free is that I get to choose what I do because no one telling me what to do. So I choose to only work with pleasant people.
That's great.
It's a
Because
lot.
you yourself is very pleasant and humble. We met in Hawaii in 2018 and the volcano was going off and you basically helped me to evacuate because I froze. I didn't know what to do. So I'm so grateful for you. And also, I didn't know you won multiple Emmy Awards until years later. So to me, that's so humble.
Well, put things in perspective. The Emmys were local New York Emmys,
Okay.
but I'll take it still. They still call it.
What was it like to go to an award ceremony?
I was actually not invited.
What?
Nope, I did not get to go to that. The executive producers of the company I worked for and directed the segments for that won the Emmy, they got to go as the directors of that. We were producing a cultural show about New York City. It was about all the cool things that were happening in the different neighborhoods in New York in terms of the arts. And we portrayed artists. We showed, what was happening in Bushwick this month. We were showing what was happening in Brooklyn, in Hell's Kitchen. And I was one of the directors that put that show together and produced these individual segments about people. But the folks that actually got to receive the Emmys were the ones that basically my bosses, the ones that had developed the show and that were running the show. And I'm trying to remember. Oh, it was called Gotham TV. The show was
Oh,
on TV.
nice. And what's the difference between being a producer and director and also a writer for a documentary?
That's a good question. And I'm still wondering about that myself sometimes. In film, there's a very clear distinction. As a producer, you're primarily dealing with money stuff, whether you raise money or you help with spending the money and making sure that you stay on budget. As a director, you're basically the creative brain behind everything that happens. And the writer then helps you put those creative ideas into words and put them on paper so that you can communicate with other people for fundraising, for the crew, for talent, whoever. In television, there's an overlap. In television, the same thing I did was sometimes called segment producing, sometimes it was called directing. It depended on the show. It was also just like in my own work as a documentary filmmaker that I had to wear many hats. If on my own films, I do everything from writing grants, meeting with potential funders, writing budgets, hiring crew, etc., to being on set and making sure that we get what we need, and then sitting in the edit room with the editor and putting it all together. In television, it was similar that, for example, the last shows I worked on were all animal shows, which was actually my favorite chapter of my television career. It was called Unlikely Animal Friends, a show that is actually apparently to this day airing around the world. My family saw me because I snuck myself into 2 of my episodes in the background. My family saw me on television in Germany because the show was aired there. And it's about unlikely animal friends. So sometimes it's like it's a cow and a dog that are best friends, or it's a sheep.
I've seen those.
See, like everybody, they're so cute and everybody loves them. Sometimes it was just about people with unusual pets. We had one story about these 2 women that had raised a squirrel that they had found in their garden. And on that show, because the budget was so minor, I would literally fly into a city by myself. We filmed all over the United States. I would fly in the morning, then meet the people we were going to film, scout the location, make sure I knew where I could get lunch for my crew, buy some waters and some snacks for the next day. And then the next day we would film all day, 12 hours. And then the day after that, I would be on the flight to my next location. We literally had one
Wow.
day. And I had to make sure that, like I said, my crew had to be fed. My crew had to have water. I reached out to them to make sure they knew where to meet me, what time to meet me, what equipment we needed. And then on the set, I made sure that we had everything to cover the story in a way that an editor would be able to pull it together, that there was not something missing, because with something like that, if something's missing, you can't just go back and just reshoot it. There's just no budget for that. So if you forget to get a certain shot or a certain sound bite about their story, there's not much you can do. Directing really, in short, is more the creative part in terms of what actually do you see in the final segment, and producing usually is more logistics and money, but it often, in low budget documentary filmmaking and also low budget television, it also sometimes kind of overlaps.
Okay. Another friend of mine that came on the podcast is in filming, and he said being a producer is perhaps the most stressful position he's held. Is that true in your case?
Well, not knowing why he was saying that, I think it's stressful for different reasons, because again, you are dealing with the funds. I have never had to supervise a really large budget. Our Sally Gearhart documentary, I think in the end, when the film was done, we had spent about between 400,000 and half a million on the film, but that was over the course of 6 or 7 years. So I think if you had told me in the beginning you're going to be supervising half a million budget, I would have had heart palpitations. But it was over time. It was so slowly that we spent some money here, some money there. We got another grant, 50,000 here, 5,000 there, that it didn't feel that stressful. But I could see how if you walk into this, especially if you work with actors in a scripted film and you walk into it knowing from the get-go what your budget is and how much money you'll go oversee, I could see that that would be very stressful because you cannot go over budget. If you go over budget, if it's a low budget production, either simply you don't have the money, you're gonna miss it from something else, or you have to report back to the people that finance your film, and you have to tell them, well, you know what, we need another 10 or 50,000, and that's not a pleasant thing for anyone to do. So I can see how that's stressful, but again, for me personally, on the television shows, I was completely shielded from that. I had my mini budget. Hey, you have like $100 for food for your crew on that day, and so long as I stayed within that, they were okay with me. So yeah, not necessarily my personal experience.
I want to ask if you had a favorite unlikely animals that you helped.
So I think one of my favorites was definitely I got to shoot in the Bahamas. That was a family that raised a raccoon along with their two dogs. And I love animals.
What? Yes, yes.
We have a dog. I love dogs, but then to have a raccoon, and I know a lot of people don't like raccoons. I actually personally think they're really cute. And that one, I mean, it was just living in their house. It was living in the closets. They let the raccoon
Okay.
climb into the closets and open the doors and run in and out. So that was really cute, cool. And then I did a story about a kangaroo and like a baby kangaroo. And I think it was the San Diego Zoo, a baby kangaroo that had lost its mom or the mom refused to raise it. So the zookeepers had to raise it. And one of them
Mhm.
specifically got very attached to it and she would carry it around in a pouch around
Aw.
her chest and she would take it home at night. So I got to hold a baby kangaroo.
Little Joey.
Joey, exactly. Yes.
Oh, so sweet. What was it like to work on Sally? And what is the film about for people who don't know?
So Sally is a feature documentary about Sally Gearhart, who just passed away in 2021. She was very instrumental in the late 1970s in both the gay movement in San Francisco as well as in the feminist movement. She was a separatist at times. She was a fantasy author who wrote the book The Wonderground, which for especially for many women of her generation was very important. And as is the case with many women, especially lesbian women, she was basically written out of many of the histories that we have from that time. There is that
Okay.
famous movie Milk with Sean Penn, and in the film they recreate a debate on KQED, local PBS station in San Francisco, where in reality, Sally Gearhart, alongside Harvey Milk, together debated Senator Briggs. This was about the Briggs Initiative, which in 1978 tried to ban lesbian and gay teachers from working in public schools to protect the children.
Okay.
And Sally and Harvey together were kind of the people that were in the front of a movement that started at that point. I brought a lot of lesbians and gay men together, and the two of them were kind of the ones that publicly represented the movement, and they defeated this initiative. Fast forward to 2008, the movie Milk comes out. They recreate the scene on PBS, and that footage exists where Harvey and Sally debate Briggs, and Sally is nowhere to be found. In the movie, you only see one actor playing Senator Briggs, and you see Sean Penn playing Harvey Milk, and they debate each other, but there's no woman sitting next to them. So, and very few people know of Sally Gearhart. We thought this is very classic, like women being written out of history books. This is certainly not the first time and probably not the last time this happens. It turned out the reality was a bit more complicated because Sally also withdrew from the public in 1992. But the bottom line is few people know of her for whatever reason. She was very instrumental in starting one of the first women's studies programs in the country at San Francisco State, where she was the first openly lesbian to be tenured. She wrote The Wonderground. She was part of the movement with Harvey. So she was really important. And my co-director, Deborah Craig, who met Sally in 2014, made a short film about Sally and a bunch of other older women first. It was a short
Yeah.
film that was supposed to show how lesbians, as they age, how they maneuver the aging process, because many of them do not have the traditional kind of family backgrounds they can fall back on, like straight couples do. There's not necessarily children, there's not necessarily grandchildren. At the time when Deborah made the film, it was also getting married. I think it had just started or hadn't even been legal yet. So lesbian women of that age had to come up with other alternatives on how to structure their old age. And Deborah's film was about that. And Sally was one of multiple people in that film.
Okay.
And Deborah and I go back, I think, at least 15, 20 years. She showed me an early cut of the film and asked me for feedback and stuff. And I loved the film from the get go. But when Sally was on screen, like the film just blew up. So I, along with many other people, I know I wasn't the only one, told her, hey, you should really make a film about this woman. And I will help you if you want us to do that. And that's what happened. Deborah started filming with Sally in 2014, thank God. She finished the film in 2018. And then that year we started working on the feature. And 3 years later, we lost Sally. And as we found out during the filming, she suffered from dementia. So even when we were filming her, oftentimes she wasn't fully present, or it was clear that she was slowly losing her abilities. So it was good that Deborah had footage that dated back all the way to 2014. We finished the film 2024, and it premiered here in San Francisco at the Frameline International LGBT Film Festival, and has since been traveling the world. It actually is still traveling the world a year and a half later. Just today, I got another email from France where they're requesting the film. So I think we struck a nerve. What I mentioned earlier about the film about Mel Odom, that I'm not interested in doing a straightforward biography, it was the same for that film. Yes, we wanted to tell Sally's story to generations of people who had either never heard of her or were angry about the fact that she wasn't in this history books. But her story also gave us an opportunity to look into social justice movements. You know, who the people we remember are the Martin Luther Kings, the Harvey
Mm,
Milks, the Dolores Huertas of this world, when the reality is that they would be nothing without hundreds or thousands of people that do a lot of the groundwork behind them, and
yeah.
also oftentimes shape them and make them who they are. So we kind of used Sally a way to get into looking at history in a different way, instead of just, lionizing her and putting her on this pedestal like she had single-handedly done all these things. In the second part of the film, we're looking into how did Sally become the very politically active and conscious person she ended up being, and how did the movement shape this woman in general, and who were the women behind Sally that had just as much impact on the movement overall and all the changes we've seen in our society, but who nobody knows because they were not the ones who were comfortable speaking in front of 70,000 people at a rally, or being on KQED with Harvey Milk to debate as a conservative senator. Good luck with
Wow.
editing all this, Audrey.
Oh my goodness. Even with the podcast I record, I'm finding it so difficult to edit. It's pretty simple and straightforward. I don't know how you guys do it. I mean, that's why you pay professionals. Would the film be entering any festivals in Hawaii?
You mean Sally?
Yeah, because I really want to see it. I've only seen the trailer.
Well, we submitted Sally to is it Rainbow Film Festival? I forgot. There's an LGBTQ film festival in Honolulu. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure. And I think they rejected it. I know that festivals this day and age get so many submissions that it's really hard. I think, I just read somewhere that Sundance, for example, received 15,000 submissions this year. 1,500, 15,000. And I think they can
Wow.
show like 140 films total. Out of that, 40 are features. So
Mm.
it just gives you an idea. The great thing about video was and is that it democratized making films to a degree where people who could have never made films about themselves, their life, their culture, their communities, can now make them. But it also means that everybody feels like they have to make films on their iPhones. And so there's just so much content out there that it is, in a way, it is harder to compete because there's just so much out up against. So all this to say, I don't know why Honolulu didn't invite the film, but
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure we submitted it because we really wanted to go, and our co-executive producer Corey Tong is actually Hawaiian, actually from Hilo on the Big Island, and he has very, very close ties to Hawaii because of that. And I think he might have even talked to someone there, but they didn't invite the film.
Oh, since we're talking about Hawaii, what brought you here in 2018? And was that the first time?
No, I had been to Hawaii before 2018. I think what happened was two things. So one thing that happened is that the executive director of the retreat center that we both ended up staying in 2018 was an old friend of mine here from San Francisco. They had actually hired him here from San Francisco, and he moved to Hawaii to take that job. And he invited me in December of 2017 present some of my short films at the retreat center and to potentially do like a little workshop or something, because that's part of what the retreat center offers. So in exchange for a few free stay there, I presented some of my work there. And
Mm.
I did fall in love with the retreat center, but I also did even more so fall in love with the idea of just stepping outside of my life. Because, 2017, 2018 was actually the time when I stopped producing television because I was unhappy in it. And I started my own company actually after I came back from the retreat center. And that was exactly that point where I was kind of not quite knowing what to do. I think like a lot of people like that ended up with us at the time, there were many people who seemed to be in a similar point in their lives where they were trying to basically evaluate where they were in their lives and what they wanted to do with the rest of it. Ironically, people back in their 20s and people in their 60s, it wasn't necessarily
Yes.
like everybody was like having a midlife crisis. But yeah, for me, you could probably call it, well, it was a late midlife crisis.
For me, it was early.
But yeah, that was the reason that I ended up going. So, I got to know the retreat center when I did the workshop. I think I stayed for about a week. I heard about the programs that they had. I signed up for it. And then I came back, I think just like barely 4 months later. I was back for which was what was supposed to be a 3-month stint. As
Yes.
we know, the volcano cut that short, so we left after a month. But yeah, that's the story behind my trip to Hawaii.
And to change the subject a little bit, if you could be an animal or sentient being or form for one day, what would that be and why?
Did not have time to prepare for this, so let me just speak from what comes to mind first. I think it would probably be a dolphin.
Mm, how
Just be,
come?
either that or some kind of bird. I think it's primarily as a dolphin being able to explore the seas and being comfortable in it as opposed to feeling like I don't belong here, which is how I feel when I go into the ocean.
Mm,
Or for that matter, as a bird, being able to fly and experience that. I dream of flying so often. And I usually either, I work really hard, I have to really flap my arms and I can feel it. I wake up and feeling like, "Ugh, that was really hard work." Or there was a science fiction show on television. I can't remember what it's called, Raised by Wolves or something it was called. And there was a being there that would fly with their arms. They would just stand straight with
yeah.
their arms stretched out, and then they would just float in the air. And I do that a lot in my dreams as well. So making a little detour here from what animal would like to be. I think that the flying or the being able to explore the oceans as, my home turf, I think those would be high on my list.
Before we started recording, you said sometimes you feel you fit in everywhere, but sometimes you don't belong anywhere. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. Um, so I'm 61 years old. Have lived
Looking good.
I know how to find my good lighting. No, but thank you. Uh, I have lived in Hamburg, my hometown, a good chunk of my life growing up. I lived in Munich for 3 years when I went to film school there. I was in Amsterdam for 3 months of studying there. Could have stayed longer, but didn't. Then I was in New York for 12 years. Now I've been in San Francisco for 18 years. I've traveled quite a bit in part, for film festivals because I've been making films for over 30 years at this. So to some degree, I feel like it's easy for me to feel at home, to connect with people in different places. And I've certainly
Mm,
done that in Munich, New York, and here in San Francisco. So that's what I mean when I say that I feel like I belong everywhere, I belong to the world. To some degree, I could be anywhere, and I trust myself at this point that I could make it my home. And then at the same time, also there's sometimes that the feeling of not belonging anywhere because unlike, for example, my mom or my brother, who have lived their entire lives in one town with the same people, with family around 24/7, basically the same friends around, that sometimes I feel like I miss that intense connection to a place, and also that feeling of I only belong to one place and I can say this is my home base. Because for
Mm.
me, I don't know anymore. Is Hamburg home? Is San Francisco home? What is home even? It becomes so relative when you've lived in different places. So there's a good side to it, which is that yes, you can, on good days, I feel like it's the world that I live in and the world as in the globe. And sometimes I feel because of the fact that I don't really have like ongoing roots anywhere, that I don't really feel like I belong anywhere at all. It's odd. It depends on the day.
And as we wrap up the conversation, I usually ask the guest, and this is my favorite part, is there a question you have for me or the audience to contemplate on?
I think for you specifically because we met at that retreat center and we didn't have a lot of time to talk before you started the recording. I would love to hear what did change for you because for me a lot changed after that. I started my own company. What changed for you after that, and how did the experience at that retreat center bring you to where you are now? I don't know what the
Mm.
short answer for that. We need another hour maybe.
Well, no, I can tell you how my life shifted because before then I was working more in graphic design and marketing. At some point, I realized I wanted to help people more on a one-on-one base. So I studied things like aquatic massage and acupuncture. And right before I went to the retreat center, I finished my exam for acupuncture in China. So that was a kind of in between bridge.
What happened after? And you left the retreat center?
Mm.
We had to flee. We had to leave at the time when we were.
Yeah, yeah. I went back to New York for a while, for a few months. And after that, I went to Romania for about 4 years and worked in my own clinic for acupuncture and other alternative therapies because my parents are in Romania. And then my passion or interest shifted to being with animals. And of course, the manta rays called me back to Hawaii. And in part, this podcast came along because the animals kind of pushed me to do this work.
What are you doing? What's next for you?
I would love to become a professional animal communicator and work with animals in the wild and in conservation. So maybe in 3 years, check back with me. Yeah. Right now, my accuracy is only 30%, so I still need to practice a lot.
I sometimes, I don't know that at this age I'm going to start all over again. But I think if I was to start a career again, I would also definitely do something with animals. Maybe like even like just television shows about animals or films about animals. I think it was in hindsight that those were my happiest years in television.
That's beautiful. How can people connect with you and support your work?
So let me see. I have a company website. I don't know that, spelling it out. And most of my paid work is on there. It's eclecticmedialab.com, not electric, but eclectic. And then we do for my three main projects, there's a website for Sally. It's sallygearhartfilm.com. And then we have for the Mel Odom film, it's called Eyes of Mel Odom. We have a website through our fiscal sponsor. And then I do a paid project that's called Surviving Voices that for 10 years has been doing, every year we do a chapter about people living with HIV from different communities. That also has its own website. So it's probably way too much information. I think the easiest way to find out about what I do in one place would just be an email if anybody's interested in any of the work in specific. And jorg@fockele.com is an easy one. It's Jörg, my first name at Fockele, my last name Fockele.
Okay, will do. Thank you so much. Your best wishes for your next film.
Thank you. And likewise, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Aloha.